Hello, my name is Michael Griffin. Out here talking about outdoor survival skills. I'm going to talk about patterns of life. So, if you haven't watched Triangle of Life, you need to go back and watch that one first because this one kind of ties in with this philosophy. But everything in this world follows some kind of pattern, and a lot of the old time Indians and all that they understood the patterns, the seasons, and everything that life seemed to follow. And up until just recently, mathematicians had actually come up with this idea called fractal geometry. And really what it is here's a type of fractal geometry. You get like a cross center. That's the main pattern. And as you go down the pattern, you become another cross, which is smaller. And then when you come out of that cross, there's a cross there. And then from these little points, there's crosses there. And the pattern just keeps repeating itself over and over and over until it gets into a very fine detail. But it's still the same pattern as the main pattern of the big cross. And you can see that in nature. Not everything's going to follow the cross pattern, but everything has a type of pattern that it does follow, like in a tree. This is kind of like a maple tree in a sense, where you can get the trunk is going to try to go straight up, but out of that trunk you're going to have these main branches that go off, veer off, and it's just fractal pattern, geometry pattern that's repeating itself. And as you go out in the branch, the branches become even smaller branches that repeat themselves over and over and over. And as you go out on the branch, even the twigs become a fractal pattern of the main tree. It looks very similar to the tree. And eventually you'll get to the leaf. And this is a bad drawing of the leaf, but you can see the leaf thing actually follows pretty much the same pattern as the plant itself. And when you realize that life is really just a set of patterns and things that even, it doesn't have to be actual physical patterns. It could be spiritual patterns. It could be solar patterns with the sun and the moon. They all follow a certain pattern in certain seasons and stuff. Um, Trails and roads and rivers are pretty much like the same thing. Rivers are the highways for water mammals and fishes, and trails are basically the road systems for animals. You can think of it like this. We have that same pattern every day too. When we want to get somewhere and go somewhere very far, we get on the interstate. That's our primary trail that we would follow. And then as we go down and we get to a more defined place of where we're trying to go, we might take a U.S. route, which is like a secondary primary trail or a tributary from a river, main tidal river or something like that. And so as you keep going down, you can get to state roads. State roads turn into county roads. We might think this is a creek on a creek bed or a seasonal food pattern for a certain animal on a path. Then you can have community roads, city streets, suburb streets. And eventually you're going to get to your address street, the place that you're actually trying to get to. And you're going to find a source, like a house. And animals do the same thing. Fish, insects, the sun, the moon, stars, whatever. They follow a path. And once you understand these patterns of fractal geometry, it's not too hard to find out what fish or animals should be or where they're going. Get back to the root source. Um, when you start crossing main trails, as I taught in the Triangle of Life video, you get conjunctions and stuff. You might get a conjunction of an interstate and U.S. route. And when you get a conjunction like that, when you travel down the interstate, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Is gasoline stores, food stores. But the more fine detail you get closer to a city. The city gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but the roads get smaller. And so, but you end up fine tuning yourself where these fish or animal are going to be in a certain area. We're creatures of habit too. We do the same thing. Um, But once you understand a river system and these fractal patterns, or a trail system and these fractal patterns of these trails, you can go pretty much anywhere in the world and find animals or fish. You just got to understand the fractal patterns that these certain things are making. I'm going to go into detail, kind of like in a river system, so you can kind of get the idea of what I'm trying to say here. I drew this picture, not the best draw in the world, but it'll kind of give you the idea what I'm talking about. When a river starts, it's going to be like a run. You're going to have this real sandy bottom, and it's going to be a little bit deeper, but it's going to slowly taper off as the sand gives way to the pebble. And what's happening is it's dropping in elevation, so it's hitting a harder rock surface. And and so what happens, it gets into a pebble source, and then you start getting those little wavy things like you see in a creek. And a lot of fish aren't going to be in this area. They're going to travel this when they're spawning or when they have to get somewhere really quick. But they don't want to be there. They're prone to predators here. Up here in the run, you might have little baby fish because to them that's an extremely deep piece of water there to them. But what's going to end up happening? The ripple is going to turn into a boulder run. You might consider this as a rapids where all the rocks are joining. It doesn't have to be a big elevation drop. But somewhere there's going to be an elevation drop because this rock up under there is too hard for the water to cut through. So it's just going to eventually just fall over. And it's going to dig out this pool. And the pool's going to be pretty deep. And this is where a lot of the fish are going to congregate because they can feel safe from their environment, from hawks and mammals or whatever. They can just dive deep. There's a lot of food that's going to be gathered and churned up in here. And eventually this is going to taper off and it's going to go right back to a run again. And it's going to repeat the same pattern over all the way from the top of the mountain where it starts all the way to the tidal river. And you might end up getting up at the top, a waterfall, a gravitational pull on the river might only be 1 inch. And then as you go down, the waterfalls get higher and higher and higher. But eventually, the waterfalls start giving away because there's just not enough height in the land anymore. So it gives away to rapids. And then rapids eventually give off into where you don't even see the elevation change with the naked eye. You have to kind of look at the water, and you'll see the water kind of waving. When you get closer to the tidal, the ocean, the water just kind of waves like this, and you know that there's some kind of elevation drop of, a sandbank or there's boulders up under the water. And if you know that, you can understand there's a pool on the other side of those rocks, even though you can't see it. Sometimes you can see eddies up under the water because water will boil up. It looks like the water's boiling. And that lets you know something is down up under there. And if it's big enough to make a big bowl, it could hold fish. Now, it could be trash down there. But if you start to see a lot of them, most likely it's going to be some kind of hard surface or a tree down there. Something that's going to create hole or habitat for fish. And go back to this. You go back and look, and you'll see when this falls into an elevation drop, when it digs out the pool, most of the fish that are feeding will be at the beginning of the pool. They're up there waiting on the food to come. They're the first to come, first served kind of basis. And they don't want to be back here when the food comes because these fish will get them. So when they get tired, they kind of come back here and take a rest behind a eddy up in the pool or something. And then they'll come back up here. But when they want to go to sleep, they get up under the log jams to make themselves feel safer. And they'll be way back there in the back sleeping. So if you want to spearfish or something like that, and have fish that's not really moving or paying attention to you, you can go up to those log jams and just kind of stand right over them and just spear them. It's not that hard. We're going to get to another type of pattern that's in a river. And this is like a bird's eye view. The blue is not just the river itself. The black outline is the river. But I'm just trying to show you the depth is in the blue. And this is a bridge here. And normally you're going to have this pattern that there's a river inside the river. And what I mean by this is this is softer sand or something, so the river can cut through it. But on the other side, it might be pebble or pebble sand or rocks or something. And so it wants to cut through the easiest way. And what's eventually going to end up doing is going to come to a point where there's a rock, hard surface, or a hard mud bank when you get close to the tidal rivers, and it can't cut through it anymore. So what it's going to do is naturally bend. And as it bends, it creates this big hole. And this big hole congregates a lot of fish. Across from it, normally you will see a point. It could be up underwater, or it could be a beach. You got to understand, if there was a beach there yesterday and it's not there the next day because of the rain, the elevation's rising, falling, but it's still going to be shallow, and the little baby fish are going to be hanging out. And eventually, it'll cross back over to the other side of the river, and it'll hit another hard surface, and it'll keep bending. And this pattern will keep following all the way to the river. Um, you'll get some kind of waterfall or eddies or rapids or whatever, which are actually creating pools along the elevation drops alone. And then talking about fractal patterns, this is a main river, but you get a fractal that is basically a tributary creek, which is nothing but a smaller version of this creek. And eventually there will be a tributary creek that comes off of this creek, which might be, a ravine or a brook or something like that, a smaller creek. And it just keeps repeating itself until you find a spring. And but when you come up here, you'll see like islands that the river will pass through. And on either side of the island, you'll have a pool on one side and a pool on the front side. And you can even go down to a bridge, and the bridge pilings are basically like baby islands. So it'll produce the same thing. There'll be a pool on the back side and the front side. Even on rock eddies, it'll do the same thing because rocks are basically miniature islands. So as long as you keep that in mind, you can understand where the fish are generally going to be. They're going to be in this deep hole. They're going to run up this channel because they feel safer. They'll come over here to feed if they want to be in the shallow spot. And eventually, these tributary creeks will come in and create a pool here as well because the water is here. And plus, there's a cooler water temperature change from the warmer water here. And a lot of fish in the summer would like to congregate here because they want to cool down just like we want to cool down. And so they'll sneak across over here, and especially during a rain. All the insects will come down this river that got washed away, and this will be a big place to fish at during a rainstorm or after a rainstorm, up to 2 or 3 days, because the insects are still washing into this pool right here. So this is a hot spot. But during the winter, fish are going to come back down the river, and they're going to find the biggest hole. Um, this hole is could be anywhere from 1 foot all the way to 100 foot, and during the wintertime, they're going to find the biggest hole. So if you know where the biggest hole is, then you can find any fish in the wintertime. But generally, fish are like salmon. They go upstream and then they come back. They go upstream to mate, spawn, then they come back down. Just like the salmon. They just sometimes just don't make it to the ocean. You got to understand waterfalls, man-made lakes, are nothing but rivers that are been dammed up. So when you look at a lake, you concentrate on the river that's actually inside the lake. You'll see the fingers going out of the lake. And those are really just rivers, smaller rivers join into the bigger river that's in the center. And you can follow the channel markers. And when you follow channel markers and you see the same color channel markers in a triangle pattern, you got one here, one here, one here. The point of the triangle up here will be a bend in the river. So you know there's a hole on the outside bend. If the triangle point is pointing to the green marker, then the hole is on the green marker. It's always on the outside. And so you can basically understand anywhere you go in the world. You need to know the fish. You don't need to know where they're from or what they're doing. You just understand this simple pattern, and you can find fish, animals anywhere in the world. You may not know what type it is, but you will find food, and from there you can go to the triangle of life and kind of narrow down what they're eating and not. But if you're spearing or catching fish with a net or something, you don't need to know anything. You just need to start fishing. Thank you. That's the fractal geometry and how to better fish and hunt.